Welcome to OverBoost 45. OverBoost is a podcast interview series featuring discussions with speedrunners about their history in speedrunning and gaming and the runs they're passionate about. I am your host, PMC Trilogy, and with me today is Viper Racing. Viper, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, I have a question for you. Normally, I would lead this off with current events, and I'm going to give you a chance to maybe fill in like a current project for me. But I have to do this because I've definitely seen your name around for a while now. You know, I tend to do like GTA games, open world games, and so like when I look at something like Driver, of course I immediately saw your name involved with runs and leaderboards for that, and for that, not only just for the first Driver but the whole series as well. And I've noticed that your handle on the overlay is Viper Racing. If you look at like your graphics, it's Viper Racing. But like your username is usually the BPG 13. Is there a story here with the usernames? Should we avoid this subject?
There's not. It's not really like an embarrassing story or anything behind it. The long story short, with where the whole name sort of differences or why there was two different names. So I can go off either. It doesn't really matter which, but the original one was the BPG 13. I've kind of stuck with it from day one. Mm-hmm. When I first set my YouTube channel up about 11 years ago, I think it is at this point. I was only 13 at the time, so I'm going on 24 now, but I was 13 at the time. So originally I just wanted BPG and then 13 at the end, and I used to do it a lot with games and the like. And YouTube turned around and went, you can't have that username, you need to have the. So I was like, okay, I guess we're known as the BPG 13. It just kind of stuck. Regarding the Viper Racing part, this was a bit of a change that happened a couple of years ago. And again, I've kind of stuck with that as well. But like I said, either name works and either name is fine. But the Viper Racing side of things is, so one of my favorite cars is a Srt Viper Gts. It's like a Dodge Viper, but I think it was performance package or something that took over. It was called SRT, and they made a few other cars since. But I really like the car, and I was quite drawn to the word Viper for some reason. Okay. I don't know why. Like, I don't think a lot of people have clinges to certain words, but two words that stuck out were Viper and Cobra, and I had this weird like attachment to those two words. So I was like, Viper sounds good. So I stuck with it, and the Viper Racing part was mainly because I like the word Viper. I like racing games. So I was like, put them together, But funny thing to mention about this is I did not know this. So not long after, I went to look for Viper Racing on YouTube, thinking my name would come up. Sure. Thinking my YouTube channel come up. Turns out there's a game that released in 1998 called Viper Racing as well. So you come up with the YouTube channel and the game, but the game comes first, with it being as popular as it was. So I was like, maybe I didn't think about this. So yeah, that's a little fun fact for everybody. Okay.
Well, while we're on the subject of names, I wanted to ask you. So based on watching your some of your VODs now and lurking in a few of your streams, I feel like it's safe to say that beyond just racing games, you have an interest in motorsports and cars generally. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So before I settled on the name for this podcast, I did some Googling. I was like, does anyone have a podcast called OverBoost? And when I searched the term OverBoost, it popped up as a term in like car engines. Is that right? Is that a thing? Have you encountered the term OverBoost in the world of car engines?
Fair to say, before I'd heard of your podcast and before of the OverBoost, the word itself, fair to say when it comes to cars, it wasn't something that I'd heard before.
Okay.
So it's something new for me as well.
Right, it could be very niche. Yeah. Obviously, searching at Google, it's going to turn up the word. Yeah, I mean, for me, it comes from an Armored Core 2 and 3 thing. Again, the mech games, coming up. That's where it comes from. But like, I think I was just curious, like, it's a car thing. But all right, well, let's get into things. So let's go back in time. Let's go into history. Where does gaming start for you? Actually, maybe this is a better way. In a way, so usually this is how I would start. Usually I would say, where's gaming begin for you? But I already alluded to the fact that after watching your runs, I noticed you have this interest in motorsports and cars. Can you say that one comes before the other for you? Like, which one did you get into first, games or cars? Or was it really just you encountered Gran Turismo and it happened at the same time or something?
It's kind of hard to say which came first. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg question, which came first. For me, it was a case of when I was younger and I had a PlayStation 1, and the first few games I had, or the games that I played most notably, were the original Colin McRae Rally and the original Driver V Rally. And cars kind of just took on a whole new love for me. My dad had an old Porsche 944 in the garage. So that was like he called it the Red Rocket, although when you say Red Rocket and the fact that his car set up, it ended up in flames twice, but that's a story for another time. But the car love kind of came with that, I think. In terms of games, I think that's just a case of I was, like a lot of people that have got into games themselves, it'll be a case of they're in the right moment at the right time with certain consoles that they love. So like for me, my first ever console was a PlayStation 1, so I've kind of loved it from the PlayStation 1 onwards. Some people might be the Sega Mega Drive or the Dreamcast, that sort of thing. But I think it was just kind of a mix. The motorsport side of things is a bit of a different one because of the fact that motorsports wasn't primarily my passion, so to speak, up until maybe about 8 or 9 years ago. So, like, for example, as it stands right now, I'm a huge Formula 1 fan, so I watch a lot of the F1 stuff. Rallying was something that I only took an interest in terms of the video games side of things. And then cars as overall was a case of going to car shows and motor shows and things like that. So it was a bit of a mix between which came first. It's hard to pinpoint it was this one and this one and this one, because they all kind of blend into one for me. They all just came under the same time. Sure. It was like when I was about 2 years old, and things have kind of gone from there.
Now,
but yeah.
Some of the games that you mentioned, Colin McRae Rally, Driver, those are games that, you do speedruns of now or recently. Are you still running on some of the same hardware that you had when you were a kid? Like, is it still the same copy of Driver and Colin McRae, or?
Well, when I first started running Colin McRae Rally, I was running on emulation because of the fact that I didn't know how to set up an old PlayStation and do all the whole capture card stuff very well, especially for old consoles and whatnot. But then over the years, it's weird because it feels like I've gone back to front. Because now I'm running on, like, for the last 2 years, maybe 3 years, I've been running on consoles for them. So, for example, when I played Colin McRae Rally now, I tend to play on a North American PS2 because that's the faster version, so I play on that. Same with Driver. I play that on original hardware, but when I used to play it, it was on original hardware. Emulation kind of came about as an easier way to play. I think that's kind of the way I look at it. It's kind of, if the console or the game's hard to get hold of, then I think emulation's a case of, it's a nice balance. It's nice in between. If you can't get hold of the console, whether it be it costs a lot of money or for whatever other reason, it's just a case of, it's just kind of like a middle ground. And it's a case of console, so original console, then emulation, and then back onto console again. So that's why I was saying it went back to front a little bit over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're getting to some stuff. All right, so let's hold some of those thoughts, because I feel like some of the thoughts that you're getting to especially have to do with playing those games in the context of not only speedrunning, but also streaming them. So we're gonna get back there, because of course this is a speedrun podcast, so of course I'll have to ask the question about how you got into speedrunning. But in the meanwhile, I did also want to ask, a lot of these games that we're talking about are expressly racing games. Now, like Driver, I don't think the original Driver didn't have a multiplayer mode, right? Did it?
Not that I know of. It was just kind of survival and
single player game, right? But something I would imagine, I never played any of the Colin McRae Rally, but I'm guessing those probably have multiplayer modes.
Yeah, pretty much. Split screen, alternate play, yeah, that sort of thing.
Did you spend a lot of time doing multiplayer stuff for games like that, or did you have multiplayer phases in other games? I hope for anyone listening, especially people who might be coming from your community, I am not too literate in racing stuff. Like, I'll hear of things. I have heard of iRacing. I saw the headlines about, big motorsports people getting into iRacing during the pandemic. So I'm, kind of a little bit aware of these things. But in terms of like, if I really want to go online and just erase people, I don't know, either 10 years ago or now what games those would have been. And so I'm curious if you have spent a lot of time doing, multiplayer racing games, either from a couch co-op perspective or online.
Well, considering the age of some of the games that I play, a lot of them have just a typical split screen co-op play sort of thing. And there was a few times where, like, me and a friend from next door, or maybe me and my mum, or me and my dad, would probably play like half an hour doing like a co-op championship or something like that. But then as like the years went on and online play was more mainstream, I eventually got into the world of online multiplayer. Racing against people online. So I think I was playing games like Project Gotham Racing 4 and things like that. My main like multiplayer experience, really, I mean, up until when I got my Xbox 360, was a case of inviting friends round, and then we do split screen or alternate play and that sort of thing. But as far as like the multiplayer side goes, when I got online with my Xbox 360, I think it was probably about 2010 or 11, probably around the time I started YouTube. It's a case of a lot of people, I got racing and I got quite into it. I was even in, at one point, I think maybe about 7 or 8 years ago now, I was in doing league racing stuff. So a bit like iRacing, but it was on F1 games or Forza Motorsport, but from like the early years, that sort of thing. I've been through a fair mix, really, over the years. But as far as multiplayer goes now, I don't do too much of it, but it's a case of, like, I've been doing just casual play, like multiplayer with friends on, I think it's Wreckfest.
Yes, I lurked in one of those streams like a week and a half ago or something. I think you were doing a weekend stream, and I caught one of it, and I was like, oh, this is cute, this is fun.
Yeah, it was just kind of like me and a few friends, and I invite people if they ever want to like stop by and things like that. If they just want to ask for the passcode, it's never usually a complicated password. I never do set one very complicated, but it's just a case of just trying to give something back to the community, and a case of, rather than it be from the stream perspective, this is something that I've set for myself this year, which is the last few years I've been doing events and marathons and things like that, and doing speedruns as a whole. And I was like, you know what, I need to really kind of start to give back to the community, because I don't feel like I gave back too much, other than obviously putting my presence out there and entertaining people. So this is where the whole Wreckfest thing has come about over this last like few months or so. It's quite fun and things like that. I do enjoy multiplayer, but there's a certain point where it becomes fun, and then it's a case of like, then you start to get into like the competitive side of things, like esports and things like that. And weirdly enough, for me, that's not the route that I want to go down at the moment. It's just a case of I want to kind of have fun and play the old games and that sort of thing. But yeah, multiplayer's definitely stuck around for the last couple of years, that's for sure.
Have you ever gotten into, so, we discussed some multiplayer games in a specific genre. Have you had any trips into some of the other popular multiplayer genres? Your MOBAs, your MMOs, anything like that?
Well, I mean, Call of Duty, I've definitely had a few times on that. I think that's the one that a lot of people have tried out as multiplayer over the years. A bit of Halo here and there. Most of them have been like first-person shooters. I don't know why, but I mean, it was a case of I tried. What was it? What was the game? I think it was called Far Cry 3. Doing co-op and multiplayer and things like that, and I quite enjoyed that. But for me, I haven't played too much. I mean, apart from the racing side of things, and apart from those, I think those are kind of the only ones I've done, like stuck with, and actually like put some time into. Not been too good. I'll hold my hands up and admit that, but then again, you can't be good at everything, right?
For sure.
So,
for sure.
But yeah, that's kind of how I've done it over the years, just racing primarily. But then I have ventured my feet out and gone, you know what? I'll give Call of Duty or Halo or something else a try, and enjoyed playing a few of those games. Although I haven't played those for a couple of years, so. But yeah, still the multiplayer stuff.
Now here's a question. So you know earlier you talked about gaming started for you with like PlayStation 1, some of those early PlayStation 1 games. And we've now mentioned a few consoles. I think you mentioned PS2s, 360s, etc. One of the questions I like to ask is to get a sense of when you would have taken ownership of your gaming hobby. And what I mean by that is that it's pretty common on the show that people will be like, when I was a kid, I got as a holiday present a gift, a console. But at some point, most of us, I think, have taken ownership, meaning that, we get jobs, we get our own sources of income, and we're like, you know what, I'm going to go buy this. Like for me, example, I had a summer job when I was 15. I took all the money from the whole summer and bought a nice laptop that I finally had my own computer to play games on. Do you have any stories like that where you're like, this 360, really, I bought that all myself, or a computer or something like that?
I have a few, but I'll kind of run by them as quick as I can. So the main two that come to mind straight away is my Nintendo DS and the PSP Portable that I have. So the DS was literally a case of I wanted to for the first time ever, I was saving up a lot of money beforehand. So I think that like 2 weeks before, or a couple of weeks before that even, I used to get like a few little bits of money here and there off my grandparents and things like that. And at one point I was like, I really wanted the Nintendo DS. It was new on the market and things like that. So I was like, you know what? We're going to save up. I'm going to save up and I'm going to buy it myself. And I remember going into the shop and I ventured in there and I got the DS. I think it was the day of release, for them first day launches sort of thing. And I remember coming away feeling so happy. I was like, oh my God, I bought my first like games console. Because before that, it was again like a holiday present or a Christmas present.
Right.
Or birthday present even. So for the most part, the DS was like my first console that I bought. The PSP was a bit of a different one because to get the money that I wanted for that, I had to sell off the PS2 that I had, which was a Christmas present, and all the games that I had. So I had to do that plus some of my own saving up just to get that PSP. And the last one, the most notable one, is my computer itself. So I think it was 2013, around about there. I had to do, well, basically, I got offered like a job, not a job, so to speak. I suppose you could call it a summer job. But basically, I had to create a promotional video for a company that my dad owns, an engineering company. And he was basically saying, if you do a good enough job, we'll give you some money for it. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds like a good, I didn't have a job or anything. I was only 14, 15 at the time.
Right.
And I was thinking, you know what, I really should go for this. So we went ahead and went ahead, did it, got the shots, edited it together. Granted, when I look back at it now, it could have been better, but back then it was decent enough. So I was like, you know what, I'll put the job out and I'll see how much they give me. So it turns out they give me a fair bit for it.
Good.
And I was like looking at getting a computer anyway. So one of the main things was that we had to turn around and say, right, okay, I want a PC. I wanted to make it a proper one because at that point I was just being given the hand-me-downs, if you can call it that, from my dad at the time. So I had like his old Windows XP machine and it was really slow, and I was like, I really need to upgrade this or just get a new one or build one. And with a bit of help from my mum's technical cousin at the time, she brought him round and he was like, yeah, here's the parts that'll all fit together, the socket sets are the correct ones and your power supply will be enough and whatnot. So basically I took that money that I earned from that job and put it into the computer, bought all the bits and everything, then built the computer up. And then since then, anything that I've done on my computer has all been done by me, via my own money because of my job and things like that. So my PC is kind of like my pride and joy for the most part. And then over like maybe the last 2 years, I bought, I mean, even though the consoles are quite old at this point, I bought a North American PlayStation 2 and a super slim PS3 as well. To have a crack at that console and them games because I missed out on them with me going for the Xbox 360. So, yeah, fair to say that over the years, those are probably the main ones that have stuck out in terms of like what I feel happy with, you know, for building and for buying firsthand and that sort of thing.
You know, I definitely appreciate the story about the DS, because I feel like I've been one of those people who usually hasn't played portable consoles quite as much, and it's happened quite a few times now that people have been like, you know, I got my DS or my PSP, and like that was definitely, you know, foundational, which like by all means, there are lots of good games on those consoles. All right, so now I think is the time. How did you first learn about speedrunning?
Ooh, this will probably be another long segment, but I'll again.
I mean, we're on a podcast here. Let's go.
I'll try and keep answers as short as I can. But to kind of put it bluntly, so I think it was around 2011 or 2012. I was just browsing Twitch one day and was just seeing what everyone was playing, and I remember a couple of games that I played when I was a kid. So like one of Grand Theft Auto Vice City always comes to mind. I quite enjoyed that game. Some of the old racing games that I enjoyed, which I've already mentioned. I was looking to see if anyone was streaming at the time. Anyway, lo and behold, as I was going through games and things like that, I went on to Grand Theft Auto Vice City. That was one that took my interest quite a lot. And found somebody called Adam AK, who was streaming at the time. He was doing the any percent and things like that. And along with Adam, I found Joshimuz and a few other GTA runners as well. I found a lot more over the years, but Adam and Josh were like the first two that I first started watching properly and really got into. There was a few runners from other games as well, so like Metroid Prime 3, there was a guy called, I think it's Milstrom. I can't actually, it's all capital, it's like MLSTRM, all in one word. There was a few others as well, like D Moon, who I remember played Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. There was a guy called Kirby Master who did Metroid Fusion on the Game Boy Advance. And there was a load of different runners that I watched over the years. And then after I'd been watching them for so long, I was like, right, okay, so Grand Theft Auto to me always seemed like, I remember finding it tough to beat as a kid. You know, it was one of them games that when you're about 7 or 8 or maybe even 10 years old, I still found it very difficult to just play and to beat and everything like that. And after a while, I was like, you know what, I should... This seems like a cool idea to run against the timer and to see how good you really are against the best in the world. And the first game that I set my mind to was not Grand Theft Auto. It wasn't anything like that. It was The Simpsons Hit and Run. And it was a case of, at the time, I think there was maybe 10 or 15 players on the board, if that. And I remember loving it as a kid. I was like, yeah, you know what? I could definitely improve. I could definitely do a run of that. And I'm pretty sure I could get quite close to whatever times they were on the leaderboard, or at least I thought I could. So over like the summer of 2014, I think it was, about over the course of about 2 weeks or so, I put some time and effort into playing the game through again to relearn it. And at the same time, I was like, you know what, I need to start learning a few little strats here and there, you know, stuff that the runners were using at the time. Fair to say that game has completely changed now, but back like 7 years ago, there was only a couple of individual strats that we all used. So I was like, yeah, you know what, I'll get into it, I'll learn it a bit more, and yeah, over those 2 weeks, I think I did a pretty decent time, or from what I remember, it being quite decent at the time, for doing the all-story missions, because I just wanted to play the game through like most people normally would, you know, casually, where they just beat all the missions individually, every level, and kind of just go from there. So I did that. for those 2 weeks. But then,
Wait, were you streaming that stuff? Or were you just doing that kind of offline?
That was, if I remember rightly, I streamed that.
Okay, you did stream it,
at the time. It was quite a while ago. But yeah, I streamed all that stuff on, I think it was on YouTube actually. I know that like the clips are on YouTube as well for it, like the VODs are on YouTube. I think they're still on Twitch as well. I'm not 100% certain of that though. So I did the streaming of those then, and then it was a case of I did those 2 weeks. I went on holiday to California for 3 weeks to come over and see family and things like that. And over those 3 weeks, my mind just changed. Like my interest completely changed. I was still doing gaming and stuff like that, but speedrunning just took a back seat in 2014 after that. So it was kind of like I had a brief period with it for 2 weeks, and then there was nothing. And I think it was for about maybe 2 and a bit years, because I again, this was kind of a case of I'd switched hobbies. I'd gone from high school to college to doing a university course, so my mind and time was all over the place and I didn't know what to do. And then one day I was like, you know what, I should definitely try and get back into speedrunning one day somehow, just whether it be a case of I haven't done a run for 2 years or something like that. I was like, you know what, I should just try and get back into it. Anyway, lo and behold, I was looking at what games was on the list. I just breezed, like glanced through like Speedruns Live and that sort of thing, seeing what games people had done runs of. So I was like, well, rather than, I had a look for Simpsons Run straight away, and I was like, yeah, okay, that's still there, that's good. There's obviously Grand Theft Auto and everything. So I was like, I wonder if any of the racing games I used to play as a kid are still there. And turns out, yeah, they were. So I was like, okay, we've got a starting platform again for speedrunning. I've now got a new starting platform, which is that Simpsons Sit and Run was great and everything. I did enjoy doing that, but because I knew where racing was my passion straight away, and always has been. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to start going down that path. And pretty much since about 2016, it's just been one racing game after another. I'd say about 90% of my runs are racing game based, I think.
Yeah, no, you have an incredibly prolific maybe one of the most prolific profiles on speedrun.com that I've seen, and it is, as you say, primarily purely racing games.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to say, just from looking at it, you really couldn't tell that I like cars and motorsport, could you?
Yeah, and I was like, God, I think you might like cars.
Just a tad.
Just a little bit. It's been interesting for me to look at it and to kind of, especially like listening to you talk about things, just because like I think like the closest I ever got was I had a brother's friend who bought Gran Turismo while he was living with the family, and this brother's friend was obsessed with Toyota MR2s, like specifically that car. Right. So like you already, I can tell red flags have appeared because I said Toyota MR2. So like that's a certain kind of person who gets involved with Toyota MR2s. But but that was sort of my one exposure to it. And it's been, so I do have to ask, because we got into how you got into gaming, motorsports, speedrunning. One thing I did want to cover while we're here in this moment, kind of before we get back to the games for the long haul, now that you are, an adult and independent, or probably mostly independent, do you have your own vehicle? Do you have a car? Because I didn't hear you mention this in any of the VODs that I watched, but it seemed like a natural question to ask.
I gotta say, I think this will probably come as no surprise, but yeah, I do.
Okay.
I own a 2006 Subaru Impreza WRX.
Okay.
In lovely, I want to say not lady blue. What's the word? What's the actual blue? It's like a royal blue.
Okay.
So typical Subaru World Rally Team colors, that sort of shade of blue. And to be honest, it still feels like a dream even now. Like because I've owned a few cars over the years. I've had like my first one was a Peugeot 206, and then I moved to a Ford Fiesta, and the cars have changed over the years. But the one that I've wanted for so long was a Subaru Impreza, and about 2-ish years ago, I managed to get, well, say 2 years ago. How long was it? Probably more like 3 years ago at this point. So about 3 years ago, I was looking at getting rid of my second car, which is a Ford Fiesta. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to have a look and see if it's possible with the money I had and the car that I had by doing part exchange, if it was possible to buy a Subaru at all, whether it be a Legacy or something like that. I really wanted an Impreza. I've always wanted one as a kid. So it was a case of, right, let's just have a look and see what we got. Anyway, went on Auto Trader, which is automobile, like it's like Craigslist in a way. You know how you get your cars and things like that. So I went on there, and there was a guy selling one. It was in reasonable price, and it was the 2009 hatchback release, the 2009 model. And it was a car, I remember at the time that I wanted an Impreza. That wasn't the model I was after particularly. But I was like, well, at the time, it was low on mileage. It was a really good price. Kind of sounded too good to be true, but we went and had a look at it. Put the money down, ended up buying it and everything like that. And then fast forward maybe up until last March, so just before lockdown kicked in, that I managed to find a blue Subaru that was more the model I wanted, because there's several variants and things like that. And I finally managed to find one in blue. It was in the colour I wanted. It hadn't been modified as far as I know. And I was like, yeah, okay, it's not too far from here. It's maybe, I don't know, 3/4 of an hour in the car. So we travelled up, drove to him and everything, and I took my old car with me just so he could have a look at mine, and was like, I'm looking at buying that and things like that. So we had a chat, and there was a lot of discussion about the price of the car and what had been done. So I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to just fall to bits on me 5 minutes down the road.
Right, turn into a lemon.
So we had a go in it and everything like that. So he let us do like a test drive and everything. And he said, believe it or not, he said that car has been sat on that court for 6 weeks. He said nobody has batted an eyelid. And I said, well, how come no one's took an interest in it? I was like, it's a super Impreza. He's like, well, I don't know. This is the question we can't figure out. So I said, well, can we have a look under the bonnet and just make sure that I thought, well, there's probably going to be a reason why it's been sat there for 6 weeks and nobody's wanted to buy it. Pandemic it can be considered and everything. I was like, yeah, okay, we'll have a look at it. Had a look around it. Couldn't really find too much wrong with it. Like, as in, like, there was a few bits, it's old and rusty at times. Yeah,
normal wear and tear.
Little bits.
Yeah.
But that's what you get for buying an old car anyway. Right. It just comes with the territory, I suppose. So I was like, yeah, okay, well, we'll have a look at it. And like I said, well, I'll come back to you in a couple of days and things like that. And he says, well, just be careful. We've had a few people having a look at it as well. You're not the only one. So I was like, oh, okay. He said, yeah, but it's only been literally like the last 2 days. He said, before that, nobody had really batted an eyelid for it. I said, right, okay.
Okay.
And long story short, a week later, I bought it. So I got rid of my other car, and I was like, I finally got the car I wanted. I got it back home, and I was so happy with it. Recently, funnily enough, in the last 2 weeks, it's gone under a bit of constructive surgery, you could call it, I guess. The entire exhaust system on it has been changed by myself and my dad. We've had it in the garage ourselves and been actually doing it properly rather than... I mean, it's a case of we could have took it to a garage and everything, but at the moment it was a case of we're just trying to save ourselves some money. And we know for a fact that if it goes wrong, it's our fault.
Right. And also, I mean, you're an enthusiast for this sort of stuff too, right? It's like not just saving money. You have an interest in the car.
Yeah, because I was more a case of I wanted to give it to a garage and let them sort it out because I'm not very technical savvy minded, for working on cars and things. I mean, I might look like I'm a car enthusiast at heart, but in terms of what goes on and how exactly to get to maybe a turbo or a supercharger underneath or whatever, I'm not the guy for that. It's just a case of I'd much rather take it to somewhere that would know, with a guy who knows what he's doing and let him do it. But this time around, no, we give it our best and we've done it ourselves and everything. And but yeah, the car itself is running like a dream, and it sounds quite nice too, I might add. But as a whole, for buying vehicles and things like that, I've just, I mean, as soon as I could start learning to drive, I was so happy when I got my license. And I was like, yes, I can finally drive my own thing. I don't have to take public transport anymore. And it's kind of how a lot of people still prefer to take public transport. I mean, that's fair play. But a lot of people that I know, that I'm friends with, who haven't got a driver's license yet, they're like, what's it like to own a driver's license? I'm like, it's awesome. It's just like so much freedom. It's so good. But yeah, it's really, really good stuff. Really good stuff.
I'm glad I asked then. I thought there might be something there, and I'm glad I asked. While we're on the subject of hardware, the other thing that I wanted to ask before, because you had started talking a little bit about, playing on emulator versus playing on hardware and stuff like that. When it comes to people running older hardware, PS1s, PS2s, and also capturing that so that it can be streamed and you can share footage, there's like a deep well of hardware that like some people get into. And I wanted to ask, what is your setup like? Like, what kind of capture equipment are you using? And have you done anything with like converters? Because like some people go all the way into OSSCs, if you know what that is. But some people don't. Some people are doing original hardware, or in between. What's your setup like for running, say, PS2 games or something?
It's kind of changed over the years. So originally, the main piece of capturing equipment I have for consoles alike is original Elgato Game Capture HD, and I've had it for probably about 8 years now, something like that. It's never really let me down. I had a few problems with it a good few years ago, but they seem to have been ironed out somewhere. I don't know where, but at some point these corruptions and things like that stopped happening, and it's been quite well since. In terms of capturing the console itself, so the Xbox 360 is quite an easy one. It's just HDMI in, HDMI out. Yeah. Dead easy. The PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3, on the other hand, are a different story. So my PS2 is connected to an upscaler, which I recently bought.
Okay.
And I think it's component, so it's PlayStation 2 cable out to component cables, the 5-component. That's then plugged into a box, which is powered on. And then from that, there's a HDMI cable that comes out of that and plugs into the Elgato. So it's a case of it goes through one box, that threads out to another box, so it goes through like 2 boxes, essentially. The second one being the capture device. But it's not too difficult to set up, being honest. It's quite an easy thing to set up. And I actually got recommended to me by a friend of mine recently. I say a friend of mine, someone who has been in the racing community, not speedrunning wise, just racing community in general. And I'd seen that somebody was playing on the PlayStation 2 original hardware, and it looked really good. So much good that I thought the guy was playing on an emulator.
Right.
That sort of good. So I was like, how do you get the PS2 to look that good? Are you playing on a PS3, original hardware, and that's why it looks as good as it does? Anyway, he turns around and he's like, no, it's an upscale box. I'll send you a link for it and everything like that. And I managed to buy this box, this component box and everything like that. And it turned up a couple of days later. I got everything plugged in, and now when I play on PS2, I'm like, damn, that actually does look really good. Because before it was just using an AV to HDMI box, so it looked very fuzzy, and you could tell it wasn't too good. I know that the PS2 doesn't have too high quality options anyway, because it was the PS2 limitation of the hardware and so on. But as a whole, I think that it's a case of that sort of setup works quite well for the PS2. The PS3 is a slight bit different. The only reason it's a slight bit different is because of the fact that, well, to kind of put it bluntly, the PS3, I think a lot of people know this, but in case they don't, PS3s have something called HDCP on them.
That's right.
And it has, basically, when you try and capture it via HDMI, it doesn't like it at all. It just doesn't like it. So you usually have to use is it like a converter box? I forget what it is.
So the two things you can do with PS3 is that you can either use component cables, of course, which will create an analog signal where you won't have this issue, or if you do want to use HDMI, the most common thing I've seen recommended, and what you were probably about to say, was to use a splitter, because there are a lot of cheap splitters in the market that will strip HDCP from the packets.
Yeah, that's the one. That was the one. HDMI splitter. But yeah, the one that I used for a while was I was using the HDMI splitter for a short while.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got this box with the component to HDMI and everything, I was like, I wonder what happens if I just plug that into the PS3 and see what happens. And I plugged it in. It worked absolutely flawlessly. It was awesome. And I've not had any problems since. So as far as like the capture setup goes, I mean, for the 360, like I said, it's fairly basic. Mm-hmm. The PS2 and the PS3 use the component. As far as other consoles go, so I still use emulation for some consoles, although I don't really do too many runs on other platforms, like the Game Boy Advance, for example. But I do have one other slight... It is like a slight input... different capture device, which is for the PSP.
Okay, yeah.
Because that's a bit more tricky, but to kind of put it bluntly, there's a cable, I think it's a 3.5 millimeter audio out cable that plugs from the PSP into your computer.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to put that as a separate audio source. And it's also the same with, like, I think it's a PSP USB cable. So you plug it from the PSP and it goes into the computer. But the main thing to mention about that is where it's different. So the PSP, usually to capture it, you can do one or two ways. You could use something like the PS TV if you wanted to. If I suppose a PS3 might be able to capture, I can't remember off the top of my head. But the main one for the PSP is the use of custom firmware. And I forget what it's called exactly. I think it's like Remote Joy Lite, if I remember correctly. And that's an easy way. So basically that's where the signal that comes from the PSP screen is portrayed via that cable, and that's projected as a... So you have the program on your computer, you've got, obviously, the cable plugged in, and the signal or whatever's showing on that PSP will show on the computer as well. So it makes it easier, rather than a case of, like, when you play on... Like, for me, I play with a slight delay when it comes to playing with the Elgato. But when I play on the PSP, it's like whatever I'm playing there and then, it's pretty much in sync with whatever's on screen. So it's a case of if I see it, they see it.
Right.
So it has a bit of an interesting tweak to it, but that is probably the only major... Like, it's a bit of a pain to set up as well because PSP has its own battery source. It's not like the mainline consoles where you just plug them into a power socket and there you go, you've kind of got unlimited power in a way. Whereas with the PSP, because it relies on that battery, most of the time, whenever you're playing it or having to run of something, I've usually got a charger cable plugged into it.
Right.
Just because the fact that so it doesn't run out of battery halfway through a run where it's like, I'm doing well, and then it's gone.
No,
so it's that
nobody
sort
wants
of thing.
that. Yeah. No, portable capture setups are always a pain in the butt. Shout outs to anyone who's had to deal with DS or 3DS capture, which is its own nightmare.
Oh, yes.
All right, so I want to get through some takes about individual speedruns. So I think you mentioned before that the first run that you did and captured was in fact Simpsons, right? Simpsons Hit and Run.
Yeah, that's correct.
So we got that one. Of all of the games that you have done speedruns of, what is your favorite speedrun?
So many speedruns.
Yeah, you got a few to pick from here. Yeah. You can name a few. You don't have to. I'm not going to force you at gunpoint to say one. You can pick a handful if you want.
Oh, I mean, it's still tricky. You can pick a few, but I will try and minimize them down a little bit. So, for me, it's always going to be. I'm probably usually going to say the same answer every time, but for me, it's always been the original Colin McRae Rally and Colin McRae Rally 2 as well, because of the fact that the first one for me has always stuck by me. Just as a case of I played it when I was a kid, and it's basically always had a place in my heart for racing wise and things like that. So that's the reason why that sticks. And the second one, due to the amount of, I think it, like that game's it's changed perspective over the last few years for me because of the community and what great job they've done of it. So the game used to be like an hour and a half, an hour and 40. It's now like an hour and 20, an hour and 15. It's had some time knocked off. For a racing game that is all about traveling from point A to point B, yeah, it's come down a lot. So I quite enjoy running that. I've recently took a bit of a break from that, but in terms of where that stands on like my favourites list, them two games stand up there. Same with the original Driver as well, and of course the Simpsons Hit and Run. There's a few other games on that list that I could mention, but there's that many that I've done runs of. It's hard to kind of like pick more than a few. It's difficult.
What about the flip side? You got so many runs. Have there been a few where you've done a speed run and you're like, my God, that was awful. I'm not doing this again. Do you have a least favorite speed run?
I have a couple, but again, I'll keep this as short as I can. So a few that come to mind in particular are I did a run of Portal 2. It was a blind run though, so I suppose that counts for something. And I think it was like 9 hours, and I was just dead by the end of that. It just killed me. Because normally playing that game through casually, I love it. It's great. But when you're trying to just go fast with no idea what you're doing, or for a game that you haven't played in years, it was not fun. But a few that definitely come to mind that definitely got the blood boiling, I'm like, I do not want to run this game again. So there's 3 in particular that definitely come to mind, as well as Portal 2. So there is Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase for the PS1. There is World's Scariest Police Chases for the PS1.
World's Scariest Police Chases? I've played that game.
It is hard as nails. So hard. And then the last one that comes to mind would probably be... it's one that I've done recently, actually. V-Rally 1 for the PS1. So funnily enough, I'm picking PS1 games here. There is another I could pick, and it pains me to say it, and I know a lot of people are going to go, oh dear. But there's actually Need for Speed handheld titles. I've done a few runs of those, different ones over the last few years. The ones that stick out, though, there was Need for Speed Most Wanted on the Game Boy Advance. That was 4 hours of hell for me. It dragged. You know, it was one of them. It was like a 20-minute run that felt like 4 hours. Kind of how it felt. There was Need for Speed Undercover on the Wii. There was, I think it was, what's the other one? Need for Speed The Run on Wii. That's not as bad as the other two, but it's still up there with kind of bad. And the worst thing is I want to go back to them to just improve my times on them. You know, it's kind of one of them, for them games that, even though they're bad, I still want to go back and improve on them. And then when I've improved, I'm like, I am now done. I just want to get them out of the way. So there is a couple of options there. I mean, the main one that's always stuck with me through all of them that I've mentioned, has to have been World's Scariest Police Chases, because I did a blind run of it. It took about 2.5 to 3 hours blind the first time round. And then for like the second run, I was like, right, I'm going to just try and beat everything first try.
Yeah.
And over one night, I was like, right, well, I'll do my run on I'll do a run for it and everything, and I'll try and improve on it. But the main thing is that when I was trying to improve on it, I was thinking, oh dear, this is really difficult, and I didn't realize how difficult it was. And even with all the practice in the world, the AI can just, at a moment's notice, just snap into overdrive, and before you know it, run's dead. It's just difficult from start to finish. And then when I finally got to the end of the run that I did for that, I think my PB is like a 107 or something. But when I got to the end of it, I was like, it's over. I'm so happy that's over. But I still want to go back to that one day. But it's a case of, due to how hard it kicked my backside last time I did it and did a run of it, I'm like, you know what? No, let's just leave that. One day I will, but for now, no. Let's just leave that alone.
Yeah, there's better places to go first. Speaking of which, my next question would then be a game that you would like to speedrun, but you haven't gotten around to it yet.
Oh, so I actually have a list of games that I'm like, I want to do in the future. One that comes to mind is, I think it was, well, I have a few, but I'll keep this very brief. So 3 that come to mind. One of them is The Godfather, the game, the first one. Looks really cool. I remember enjoying that when I had it on the 360 a few years ago. Bully was another. And the last one was the first Race Driver Grid. Again, all 3 games are a case of I played them, I beat them all, but it's a case of speedrunning wise. The Grid one's obvious for racing reasons. That's the whole reason why I was attracted to that one. Bullet is a case of it just was a fun game when I remember playing it through. Again, a lot of them will be the same reason it was fun when I played it. But there is a bit of speed tech that I do like about them as well. And then the last one being The Godfather is a case of it does involve driving, but it's the shootouts and things like that. It's a bit of more variety. And that's kind of what I want to go for. I've been doing a new game recently, which was Disney's Treasure Planet for the PS1. Kind of long story short on that one though, I've had a couple of attempts at other games over the years, but the main one is a case of I want to try and at the moment this year it's turned into one of them cases of I want to expand my horizons. I don't want to just be the guy that's seen as the racing guy. And that's it. It's going to be hard for me to shake, and I know this, but it's just a case of I just kind of want to expand my horizons a bit and just kind of prove to myself that, hey, you're good at racing games. Let's kind of show that you're not just good at racing games. Let's try and show that you can do other games as well. Don't have to be great at them. Some of them I just want to get out, do an attempt at them or a few attempts and try and get a somewhat decent time. But there is games that I'm I really want to be good at them games, and I really want to put the practice in and really go for it. That sort of thing. But yeah, Treasure Planet was one recently, but excluding that one, like I said, Bully, The Godfather, and what was the last one I said? Forgot the last one. What was the last one? Oh dear. The other one. Forgot the name of it now. Bloody hell. I always forget the third one. But then 3 games that I've mentioned. That's the easiest way I can say it.
No, that's good. That's good. What about
Grid? That was it.
Oh, Grid. That's right. Yeah, I was like, I know you mentioned the third game. I'm listening too, right? Of course. What about a favorite speedrun to watch that you do not run yourself and you have no plans to run yourself?
See, I want to say Grand Theft Auto Vice City. But I feel at some point in the near future I may be doing that one. But for now, for a run that I have watched, I'd say it's that one. It is still, until I ever do a run of GTA, it's a case of I will always probably say the 90% looks really cool. Not the one with the, I think it's the 90% SSU.
Yeah, no SSU. Yeah,
it's the no SSU, the 50-minute category, I think it is. That around that sort of mark. I've wanted to give that a try for years, but it's a case of I've been taught a few of how it works, with the replay system and things like that. I have been taught a few of those by a few guys in the community, most notably a guy called Trigger. And as a whole, I'm I'd love to try and run that game one day, but for some weird reason, something inside me says, don't do it. It's just you know how much dedication you've got to put into it, and you know how hard these guys have put into it to get the times they've got, and it will not be an easy feat. So I'm scared to do it, but at the same time, I do want to do it. It's a weird mix. But I could definitely give you 2 games properly to really answer your question, though. 2 games that I've seen runs of that I would probably never try myself, but look really cool when I watch them. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, the 90% for that. It was really fun to watch when I used to watch it years ago, and it still is now. I still enjoy watching them every now and again. But the main one that comes to mind, actually, is Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. So I did mention this earlier as one of the first games I ever watched before I got into speedrunning. And to this day, I still enjoy watching 80% runs every now and again. And I still think I'd love to do that run, but given the fact that I'm not a Metroid runner at heart, I never have been. I've enjoyed some of the games. Not granted, I haven't played all of them, but for the ones that I have played, I have finished. I've just really enjoyed playing casually. And to see someone go out of bounds and jump around the map, and I'm thinking, God, I don't know where I'd start with a run like that. So I'm this is why I let them guys do it, and I just kind of sit and watch. But yeah, it's a very fun time, that's for sure.
No, that's good. That sounds solid to me. I find it very interesting. That's one of the reasons I like to ask that question is because even as you're broadening your horizons, there are still these things that you kind of view as being like still like a little further than just your horizons, but still stuff that you enjoy watching. All right, I got one more game take question, which is, you've done runs at some different marathons. Some of the VODs that I watched, like I watched the ESA Together VOD when I watched Driver. I know you've done like UKSG stuff. Do you have a game that you've not yet been able to do at a marathon that you want? Like if you could pick a marathon and a game to show off at that marathon, what's that game? Like you could just automatically get that into a marathon that you have not been able to show off at a marathon yet.
So this would be one that I take it this would be one that I've done a run of myself, but it's never done. I've never done it for any marathon.
That's right.
At all.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was going to say Pursuit Force Extreme Justice for the PSP, but I have shown that off at a marathon. It's kind of hard to say because I've shown most of the games that I've done runs of. I've shown off at marathons in particular, or like a minor marathon or something like that. It's kind of hard to say, really. I mean, given the fact that I've recently done a run of Treasure Planet for the PS1. That's definitely one that I'd like to show off at a marathon. Ideally, when I've got better at it first. That's the main thing. Like trying to improve on it, really get it down, and then start submitting it. That's kind of the only one that comes to mind at this current moment. But it's kind of a weird mix because a lot of the games I try and. This is something that I do with marathons, I'll believe it or not. So a lot of people might submit the runs that they're the most good at, and that's completely understandable why. I think it makes perfect sense. You're good at something, you submit it. For me, it's always been a case of I've submitted runs that I'm familiar with, but a lot of the time I'm also trying to submit runs that I might have not done that run for 2 years, and I've wanted to de-rust it and show it off before. So I've submitted that for events and things like that. One actually event, funnily enough, I could probably mention this. Again, this may or may not answer the question properly. But in terms of games that I've done in like maybe the last year that I haven't shown off at a marathon yet, one that definitely comes to mind is Horizon Chase Turbo. So for those that don't know about that game, it's basically got a very similar setting to that of like the old 1980s ZX Spectrum game. So a guy called by the name of Tiny Tim, I'm sure a fair few people know who he is, but if you don't, he's one of the guys that works behind the scenes at UKSG. He's helped out at ESA and stuff like that. But as a whole, he's an absolutely awesome guy, and one of the things that he loved doing when he was younger was playing these old ZX Spectrum games. So one that he always looks at is Lotus's Free Turbo Challenge, I think it's called, for the ZX Spectrum. It came out around the mid-1980s, around the time when Tim was alive, and around the time when when he was a kid and things like that, and he really enjoyed it. I was like, you know what? This guy clearly likes these sort of games, and for me, it was a case of I'm sure there's going to be people out there that are like, I play multiple racing games and things like that, but in terms of the actual game itself, like I say, it's got very 1980s vibes where it's just kind of press left to go left, press right to go right, but instead of it being as it used to be, so those sort of games are a case of, I think a lot of people may have played them. I don't know what you could call them because they are them sort of racing games or driving games, should I say. But in terms of what them games hold, the concept has been going for years, but they've done a really good job with this Horizon Chase Turbo. And the runs are really like very compact. I mean, I think there's a rookie series and the summer vibes, and they're only about 45 minutes, but it's all about you've got to pass 19 cars every single race. You always start from the back, and you've always got to pass the cars. So bear in mind, you've got to make sure you don't go off the track. You've got to make sure that you don't hit anybody, and you've just got to keep the speed as much as possible. You've got to keep boosting at the right time. there's a lot of stuff that you have to keep. It's very fast paced and action packed, I think.
Yeah.
From start to finish, and it's a game that I only picked up last year and played properly for the first time. Played all the way through, really enjoyed it. Did 1 or 2 runs of it, and it's one that for me to get into a marathon would be awesome. It's funnily enough, I think about the time of us, time of me saying this, it might have already gotten one already. I don't know. But
there are a lot of marathon submissions
something
going on right now for sure. Yeah,
exactly. So it might have already gotten one. I don't know, but if the day that I can show that off will be awesome, absolutely awesome. So can't wait.
All right, so while we're on our way, so we're gonna get now into some specific questions about some of the games that I watched VODs of. Before we get there, because the games that you showed off or you had me watch were over a variety of consoles, I did want to ask, do you have takes when it comes to controllers? Meaning, do you have a preference for pad? Also, we're in the world of racing, and there are some expensive steering wheel peripherals out there. I don't know if you've ever dabbled in those. So I'm curious if you have any favorites, least favorites when it comes to controllers, and if you've done anything with wheels.
In terms of racing game controller-wise, so PS2 and 360 are just their respective controllers. I've always played on those, and that's kind of that, really. I have had a crack at steering wheels before. So I remember playing on the PlayStation 2 with a wheel when I was a kid and things like that. But in terms of what I use for each one, like I said, for the PlayStation 2 and the 360 respectively, they're just their respective controllers. But for the PC, it depends on the game. So, for example, on the PC side of things, most of the games I play with a 360 controller. However, not all games are either... I mean, if the game's too old, it won't pick the 360 controller up, and I'll have to use keyboard. So it depends on the game. There are a few that, for example, like the Italian Job on PC. That's a game that's better off on keyboard, in my opinion. It feels better to play on a keyboard than it does on a controller, so I'll switch to that. But in terms of like each individual console, most of the time I just play pad. I don't really play with the wheel. I've had wheels in the past. Like I said, I had a wheel for the PS2 a good few years ago. I don't remember too much about it other than the fact that I really enjoyed racing with it, but I think I got rid of it because of the PSP thing I mentioned before with getting rid of the PS2. That had to go as well. And I never really bought another PS2 wheel after that. I did buy a Mad Cat steering wheel for my Xbox 360, and I've still got it now. And it's ridiculous, really, because it's so small. Like there's these like plastic cover things, so it's supposed to sit on your lap and you're supposed to drive it. But the problem is with how old the steering wheel is and the given, I guess, age range it was targeted at, it's probably about the same. It's probably about the right size for an 8-year-old kid, not a 24-year-old person. It just sits there. Your legs are cramped, and I'm kind of like, I'm playing it, but the steering wheel's like that. It's not like a proper one like you see all professional drivers using. But every now and again it comes out, and I might play one of my old racing games or driving games, either speedrunning or just casual. I'll still play it with it, and I still really enjoy it. It's one of them things, but as a whole, I try and stick to the controller for the most part. But it all depends. It all depends.
Now, did you have a preference? Like, do you feel like the 360 is better than PS2, or did you have any ranking?
I mean, again, probably a tough question. For the PS1 and PS2, I really enjoy playing them games with that controller. 360, I enjoy playing them. But in terms of which one I pick more, it's, again, difficult to say. I couldn't pick one over the other, unfortunately.
That's fair.
But,
that's fair.
Yeah, they're good in their own right, so I'll say that. Keeps everybody happy that way, so...
Well, let's get into some of these games then. So among the VODs that you had given to me, one of them was Colin McRae Rally. Specifically, it was the championship percent intermediate speed run was the one you had sent me for the first Comic Ray Rally, and I think this was a PC run. And now this is interesting to me because I do some old PC games myself too. When I say old, I mean like Windows PC games, late 90s, that sort of thing. And if I'm right, this is a 1998 game. So I wanted to ask about your because it sounds like this is a game. First off, this is a game that you played when you were a kid, right? You had this on your PS1, so that's how you got into it. What made you come back to this as a speedrun game?
I think probably just childhood memories, really. It's kind of hard to say because over the last few years, I've grown even more attached to that game as the years have gone on. But it's a game that since I first started playing, I just have been playing ever since. Like even years when I didn't really touch it, I'd still come back to it. So I could have been playing the newest Call of Duty, or I could have been playing something else completely, and I'd still somehow go back to it. It's a bit of a weird thing, but it's just one of them games that for me, I always just keep going back to it. It was part of my childhood. I loved it as a kid, and yeah, I think now it's just all it's just childhood memories that are pushing it. But as a whole, it's I don't know. It's hard to kind of explain. But again, as I was saying, it's just childhood. It probably is just childhood memories.
No,
actually.
That's a strong answer. I mean, that's a starting point for a lot of people, and I know. I have that too with some games. I late weird PC games. With this one though, you mentioned playing it on PlayStation, and I was about to ask, do you have any special setup for running the PC version of this? A 1998 PC game can be a difficult thing to get working on. I don't know if you're running Windows 10 or Windows 7 or whatever. I think in the VOD I was watching, you mentioned that there is a widescreen fix. But do you need to use other tools, your DXWD, DigiVoodoo 2, anything like that? Like, how are you getting this to work, or does it just happen to work?
So it is a bit of a tricky situation with this one because for a few years, we had the PC version running just primarily off you just install it like any other game and it'd work and things like that. But then we found that for the most part that it would just crash pretty quickly. Like even if VSync was turned on or off, it didn't matter which.
Right.
It would just constantly freeze or crash, and we needed to find a way around that. And because of that, it put a lot of people off running the PC version over the PlayStation version. So I often said, if you were to run of that game, I'd run the PS1 version because of the fact that A, it's easy to get hold of, B, emulation's allowed as well. So if you wanted to just get into that, it's dead easy to do so. And there's no real messing about. It's just a case of you can jump straight in. There's not too much time spent setting it up. The PC version now, though, it uses... So we have the European patch. I think it's like version 1.5 patch. There's a Windows 7 patch as well. And in terms of Windows 10, it's a bit weird because we have a document, like a spreadsheet, and it's still kind of ongoing. And it's a case of myself was on Windows 7 about a year ago, and we were all trying to get this game to work. Both myself and another runner called Joseph, we were both trying to get this game to work. So it was a case of, right, he was on Windows 10, I was on Windows 7. I was like, right, well, we've got two different operating systems there. Let's hopefully one day, hopefully we can get this game to work somehow using different patches, like only having a patch on one. So we tried a huge amount of bits for both. Anyway, somebody had mentioned there was a fix that came along in the form of Nglide. Now, as far as I'd never heard of it up until again maybe a year, 2 years ago, and somebody mentioned about to get this other game to work, you needed to install Nglide. So I had a look at what Nglide was and what it allowed and how it worked and things like that, and I was like, oh, this seems to work with old Windows games, not late 90s and things like that. So it got me thinking. I'm like, I wonder if it'll work with Colin McRae Rally and see if if we can get it working properly. So I installed Nglide and everything, and I got it working for that game. And then it was like, right, okay, do you want to set up, what settings do you want? You need DG Voodoo and all this as well. And it was a case of, right, Englide's installed, that's on your computer, you've got that. DG Voodoo needs these requirements, these are the settings that you need. Right, okay. Let's run the game and just keep because the easiest way to get the games crash was you just keep restarting the stage over and over and over and over and over again. So we kept doing that, and without Englide, it maybe crashed within 5 attempts of restarting the stage. So it's like, there's the game crash. But it wasn't consistent. It might have been 8 restarts, 5 restarts, 15 restarts. It would vary. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, right, well, we need to make sure that we need to, if we can, try and wipe out this entire game crashing bit altogether. So we ended up turning around, I was like, right, well, like I said, we'll use the Englide, we'll use all these settings, we'll try this. Got it running, and it runs flawlessly. It is like barely any times. I've never had, I did, to kind of prove how stable it is I did a 100% run of Colin McRae Rally on PC, which is about 6 hours. Mm-hmm. And that was including a lot of loading screens through each stage, through doing the rally school and going back to the main menu and everything like that. Never crashed on me once. So I was like, that works, and that's like the way of installing it. There is actually a guide on the speedrun.com page as well to help out anyone who wants to get it working. But in terms of that game and how easy it is to get it to run, the PC version is a bit more tricky than PS1, so it's a case of if you wanted to just kind of jump straight in and run it, then PlayStation's the console to go to, our emulator to go to for it. But if you want to give the PC version a try, then again, there is a guide for that to help you get it set up, and if anyone needs any help, obviously, you can always message me and things like that. So it's a bit tricky, but with the right, like I said, by reading the guide and things like that, it helps for if anyone wants to play it themselves, even if it's just casual rather than speedrunning purposes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point too, is that, we're part of this is the sort of the search for a good platform to speedrun on sometimes. We're just, exploring alternate versions of a game. Sometimes alternate versions can be, better or worse to speedrun for whatever the case may be. And, making these sort of fixes available after the fact is always very, very helpful. I know for sure, in games that I've run, I end up working with, you mentioned when you were talking Englide and DG Voodoo 2, which are wrappers that help, translate instructions for graphic stuff. Another one is DXW&D, and I've worked with the developer of that, with specific patches for specific games, and that's kind of support is always very fun. Now, in addition to the first Colin McRae Rally, I also watched the Colin McRae Rally 2.0 Novice Championship speedrun. Now this is like a few years later. This is I think a 2000 game. What was interesting, I always like to flip through the leaderboards just to see what's active for these games. And with the first Colin McRae Rally, I noticed that it was both PC and PlayStation were getting a fair bit of love. But Colin McRae Rally 2.0, it's really all on PC. Is it just really easy to get this game running? Or is the PlayStation version bad? Is there a story there?
It's kind of similar to, I think it's quite similar to most games that have just a PS1 and a PC port of the game. Mm-hmm. So for Colin McRae Rally 2, the PC port is, as you say, was it easy to get, is it easy to get installed? The answer is, yep, it's quite easy to get installed. There's something called Silent Patch. And when you put that on top of the game, it runs the game at 16:9, at 1920 by 1080, and a few various other graphic capabilities, graphic settings and things like that. In terms of getting that game to run, it runs fairly easy. The PS1 version is, I'm not going to say bad because it's not. It's as good as the PC version. But in terms of load times and the overall game experience itself, so like most games, some games can have the frame rate altered. So on the PS1, if you play the PS1 version, the game runs at around 25 to 30 frames per second. There is something to mention about the PS1 version, but we'll come back to that in a second. But the PC version runs at 60 frames per second. Now, you can get that to run higher than 60 frames per second, but as far as I know, like, for example, I can run it at 144 to match the monitor. But as a whole, it doesn't matter too much because of the fact that the physics seems at the same on both, which is quite nice. But the PS1 version that I mentioned is... So, for most games on the PlayStation, I do apologize for the dog barking, but
no, I understand that. I got a dog here too. If the mailman were here, we would also hear my dog. Well, maybe that'll happen later.
I do apologise for that. He must be, mum, dad must be home or something. But I'll try and there we go. I'll try and mention it as things are going. So the PlayStation 1 version of Colin McRae Rally 2. There's two different things about that. So the PAL releases runs at 25, the NTSC is 30. However, this is one of very few games on the PlayStation 1 where the PAL version is faster than the North American version. So the 5 frames actually make the difference. So you can do, like for example, the easiest way of putting it is the first stage in the entire run, like I think it's Finland stage 1. If you do that on PC with the fastest car that's available from the start, the standard cars, you can get around, like with some really good driving, it's around like 2 minute 2, something like that, or under that, 2 minute 1. If you're lucky, 2 minutes something. On the PlayStation 1, you're going to be a few seconds behind because of less frames and things like that. But when you do it on the PAL version, you'll find that getting a faster time is easier to do than the North American release. So you could drive flat out on the PAL release and get like a 2 minute 3, 2 minute 4 for the first stage, whereas on North America you really have to push. And even if you really, really, really on the limit the whole stage, you're still maybe about half a second behind. So it's one of them weird coincidences where the European release has an advantage over the North American release. But because of the fact that most people run on PC, it kind of cancels all that out, unfortunately. But yeah, the reason why everyone goes to PC is, like you said, is it easy to install and things like that. And because of it being easy to install and set up, yeah, that's pretty much the reason.
No, I mean, that's, especially if you have a silent patch too. I mean, I know. Hopefully, a GTA speedrunner doesn't rise up and slay me down. But like most communities, I think that have silent patch are like, yes, please. Or games, like for example, a few months back I played Scarface, the world, that game, silent patch is a blessing to get that game to run on, on a modern Windows. So that's always a beautiful resource. A question I had for you about, and this is probably a fundamental racing game speedrunner question. When I watched these two runs back to back, Rally 1 and Rally 2, Rally 1 seemed very pure. It was just, you were always on the track, making good turns, doing your thing. Rally 2 seemed to have a lot more shortcuts that you could take to sort of, cut some time off. Do you have a sort of preference? Do you like prefer the more pure, or if you could have like kart racing, like jump off the track to like cut it in half, do you take that? Like, do you have any, or do you just like both in their own time?
It depends. Like the first game, like you said, it's very on the track, on the limit. You're not really cutting corners and things like that, so it is more pure. I can definitely agree with that. The second one literally just looks like you've took a game and completely broke it because of how much corner cutting's involved and glitching there is. And I think between the two of them, I mean, I quite enjoy both games equally very much. The first one is more a case of I enjoy it more for the fact that, like you said, it's pure and it's basically showing what you can do on the track. It's not about who can get a glitch or who can cut a corner the fastest. No, it's all about how much you can stay on that track, how good your turns are, and it's a bit more precise, a bit more optimized. So I like it for that reason. The second one is more like a glitch fest, but I think it's a case of the community has kind of turned it that way. Now, that's not a bad thing, in my opinion. I quite like the fact that they've managed to break the game as much as they have. But it's also kind of shattered the image I once had for that game when I was a kid, where I was like, I used to just love racing on the stages. Now to find out, you don't need to do half the stages. Like, you don't even need to drive around corners. You can just cut the grass because it's quicker. I'm like, that's just ruined it. But in terms of both sides, like both sides of the coin for both games, I love them both very much in the same way. But in terms of, for me, the main thing that I would put one over the other for, and this is definitely something that I can mention, is the second one for me seems more marathon friendly. Now, the first one is fairly straightforward. It's nothing too spectacular, really, in terms of a speedrun, because it's very pure, very point to point. Whereas the second one is kind of, here's a racing game that you didn't think was ever broke when you watched it when you were a kid, or when you played it when you were a kid. And for us, I mean, like, when it was on, I did the run, I've done that run for a couple of marathons before, and the biggest one being ESA. Mm-hmm. And it was a case of, when that run got into ESA, first of all, I was gobsmacked, but it was also a case of, it's a fun run to watch. I think it has that more entertainment value than the first one does. So it's a case of, if there's one like I'd more likely to submit for a marathon than the other one, then the second one definitely wins it hands down. Just because of, like I said, the amount of corner cutting and all that stuff. It's just a wild ride from start to finish, and I love it.
Speaking of wild rides, when I had asked you, in preparation for this interview, for a collection of VODs that you were proud of or felt there were stories behind, one of the ones that you gave to me was I think your All Story Missions PB for the Simpsons Hit and Run. Now, we had already talked a little bit about Simpsons Hit and Run in the context of it being the first speedrun that you really did runs of and recorded, but it seemed like in our conversation that you heavily implied that this particular PB, which I think is like almost 2 years old now at this point, done on the Xbox version, you implied there was a story behind it. What's this? Is there a story going on here with this 20, I think it was like a 2019 Simpsons Hit and Run PB, or?
So I sent that one because of the fact that, so when I first started doing speedrun, obviously, like I said, I did the Simpsons run at first, but the reason for why I'd sent that PB was a case of, that's like the main run that I've ever done, like the best run I've ever done that game so far. But not only that, it's a case of one notable thing, and it's something that I've not really been asked too many questions, but I know one day I'm going to be expecting it, which is, why the console version of the game rather than the PC version, if the PC version is quicker? And the main answer I can give you that is, I have no idea. I just kind of, this is a genuine, truthful answer. So when I was younger, I used to play it obviously on the PlayStation 2 and things like that. Then I got hold of the Xbox copy and I played it on the 360. And I've done a PC run since, but for me, the 360 was just a case of, I felt like the console stood a bit more of a chance of, I don't know, I want to say it's like, as a console run, it feels more like it's impressive than it is on PC, because you have load times and a bit of a reduced frame rate and things like that. But really, it's it's the same game on PC as it is on the console. There's not really too much difference. I think some of the strats can only be done on PC and things like that. Like you can only you can change the frame rate on PC. It's something you can't do on a console. Mm-hmm. And obviously, there's like mods and things like that you can do on the PC version that, again, you can't do on console. But for me, I just kind of stuck with console because that's how I used to play it, and that's kind of how I've continued to play it. The PB in question, though, the one that I sent, that was kind of significant because of the fact that up until that point, my PB, which was a 156, I think it was, 156.43 or something like that, had been my PB time for about 4 years, around about there, something like that. And it was a case of, the game I'd submitted the run for UKSG in-person event at the time. And the run got in, the event, and I was very, not shocked, but I was like, guess I need to practice the game again, huh? Because it's been like 4 years, and I had to like bring it down within a month. So I was immediately like trying to grind the game down and trying to practice it more. And then lo and behold, I'd done like 2 practice runs the night before, and I'd managed to get more consistent with the game. And on that run, I just kind of, everything that I could remember from watching other runners that were ahead of me, or that were running the PC version, should I say, I was like, I've seen some of these guys do their strats and stuff like that, and I'm like, you know what? We're just going to I'm going to try and put what I've seen into practice and see if it works out. Turns out most of the things I tried ended up actually working out, which was a blessing in disguise, I think. But it came out as that 149, and fair to say that was a pretty proud moment for me, because not only was it a case of, yes, I beat a four-year-old PB, but it was, I beat a 4-year-old PB by 7 minutes almost, and I was like, yes, that was a really good moment. And the time's been better since due to a lot of stuff that's happened, but for me, when I did that run, I was so happy I'd done it, because it was a case of, like I said, 4 years, PB, busted. Yes, it's more up to date again, and I'm happy that PB now, it has something a bit more to show for. Granted, it can still go quicker. It can always go quicker, but it was a case of 4 years of derusting and things like that, and yeah, 4 years derusting brought back and disappeared again. So I was happy to get that time right up there.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something to say about, and it may not always be immediately apparent, but when you speedrun a lot of games, I think your ability to identify like what's important for going fast and to practice and to readily incorporate those things does in fact improve, even if the games you're playing are all wildly different from each other in some way.
Yeah, exactly. It's one, like I said, it's one of them games where there's a lot to it. It's not just driving. Because I mean, when I was a kid, I remember there was driving, there was a little bit of on-foot action, and I remember coin collecting, but I didn't have a clue how the speedrun worked, and over 4 years, you just forget. So it was a case of, right, I guess I need to practice this a bit more then. I need to really get into it. And I remembered briefly some of the things I used to do when I did runs of the game, so I was like, I'm not going in completely blind again. There is some stuff that I can remember. But because of the fact that the coin route has changed and certain routes that you take on missions, and there's now like out of bounds and weird wacky stuff, there was a lot of things that when I did the run the first time round, half of this stuff didn't exist. When I did that PB, half of that stuff didn't exist. And then since then, all this out of bounds stuff has happened. So if I did go back, it would be a case of, not only would I have to relearn everything I didn't do the first time round, but I'd also need to learn all of this new stuff that makes the game even more quicker. I believe like the console time now, it's like a 1:33 or something. So there's a lot of time saved for me to go for. But in terms of that PB overall time, it's just a time that I'm very happy with for now. And obviously, like I said, maybe in the future I'll improve it. But yeah, just one of them feel good moments. Happy to have it.
For sure. So another game that you sent me was Pursuit Force Extreme Justice, one that you mentioned already, I think. This is a game I had never heard of before, and it apparently is the second in a set of 2 games for the PSP. Very interesting game, a lot of shooting and driving, as one might expect. How did you discover this, and what prompted you to speedrun it?
I mean, the long story short of that one was I played the original Pursuit Force on the PSP because that was on a demo disc, as in there was just like a video of it. There wasn't really any gameplay. And I remember buying Pursuit Force when I got my PSP for the first time and quite enjoyed it. And then a couple of years later, I noticed that there was a sequel. I didn't have any idea that there was a sequel. I just noticed on the shelves like Pursuit Force Extreme Justice, and I'm thinking, what the heck? What's this? So I picked it up and played it and everything. It took me a short while to kind of get my head around how the game worked and things like that, but in terms of like that game, it just had a really fun structure over the original. But like some of the stuff that wasn't introduced the first time was more. There was more emphasis on like ramming vehicles and the shooting aspect. There was a lot more story-driven content. The first one did have a story, but you kind of had to put bits and pieces together to kind of make it out as a story, whereas this one was purely story-driven, so it was quite easy to keep up with it.
Although, unfortunately, the cutscenes are not skippable in this game.
Not quite.
Yeah.
There's two different runs for the game. There's a new game, which is no cutscene skipping whatsoever. And then there's a new game plus, which allows you to skip every cutscene, whether it's in-game or cinematic. The difference between both is about 35 minutes. And that's literally just because of the fact that you're skipping cutscenes and things like that. Roughly around that, anyway. Maybe 5 minutes is down to enemy placement in missions, I don't know. But I'd say it's at least 30 minutes difference just through cutscenes alone. But in terms of how I discovered it for speedrunning, so I was looking through my games that I had on my computer at the time, and I have a lot of PSP games that I have. I just happened to be looking through them. I thought, well, there was a leaderboard for Pursuit Force, and I didn't really remember having any fun times with that one. I was like, I finished the sequel. I never finished the original. I haven't since, but I never finished the original at the time. I was like, oh, I finished the sequel, and I think that would be quite a cool speedrun. So I was like, yeah, what the heck? Why not? We'll give it a go.
Yeah.
See how long it takes. So I think it was about a little over 3.5 hours. I was like, that's quite a long game. I didn't expect it to be as long, but then again, I've never done a full playthrough from start to finish all in one go before. Yeah, as a whole, I just started it because of a case of when I played it the first time round, I really enjoyed it. It's a game that I finished. I was quite happy that I finished it. I had done some playthroughs of it like the days before, and again found it to be very, very enjoyable. And then next thing, it was a case of, yeah, why not? Why not? We'll get a timer going. We've got some splits and everything, and we'll do what we have to do. So it was just one of them I want to say heat of the moment sort of things, you know. One of them, it's like, yeah, why not? Let's just speedrun it. Because I do that for a lot of games I have, believe it or not. It's just a case of 1 minute I'll be saying, oh, I don't want to do a run of this game, and the next minute I'll be speedrunning something that nobody expects me to do a run of. So, like, keeping people on the toes, I think, is the worst.
Yeah, no, that's sort of unusual. But that's how you discover, because I think so often, especially if it's a game that other people haven't speedrun, it can be sort of hard to know what it's actually like to do a run until you until you actually do a run, right? Like there's no alternative to actually do that. So it's the only way to find out.
Exactly. That was pretty much how it worked. It was just a case of, I saw a game, I remember it being fun, I was like, wonder what it's like to speedrun, and then did the run, that was that. So yeah, there wasn't really too much to it other than it was a case of, I played it, I finished it previously just casually and thought it was a fun game, so I thought I'd give it a try.
Awesome. So now the last game that I want to mention before we start heading for the exit here, you already mentioned, I think, a little bit, which is Driver. You are the wheelman. Now, the one that I watched was your ESA Together run from ESA Together 2020. This one was done on the PlayStation version, which it was interesting that this is definitely one of those marathon commentary runs, where you and the commentator Iceman go a lot into differences, like version differences, the spawn rate of the police for the PC version, stuff like that. I wanted to ask specifically about this because we know that this was a game that you played as a kid, so this is probably another one of those nostalgia games, right?
Yep.
And so I wanted to ask for the PlayStation version speedrun, because going into this, watching it, I was very curious, like, all right, what's he going to do on the President's Run? Like, how is this going to get handled, right? Because a few years back, me and KZ Fruit did a blind race to this game, and we set like a cap of 4 hours. And what ended up happening is I made it to the President's Run by the end of the 4 hours, and he didn't. So I won the race. Neither of us finished the game because neither of us wanted to finish the President's Run at that point. But in the speedrun, the President's Run is handled quite swiftly by just exiting out of bounds and activating an admission trigger. Do you have a favorite clip or out of bounds glitch or trick in the Driver? Like, is the President's Run clip your favorite, or is there another trick where you're like, no, this is the best trick in the Driver?
Ooh, I'd say it probably is 9 times out of 10. The other glitch that we do that's in the game is in Los Angeles. We use like an out of bounds near the sea, and it uses the same mechanic. It basically, you drown the car and it activates a mission complete trigger.
Yeah.
For some odd reason.
For some reason, I don't know why, but it's great.
It's just awesome. I mean, credits to the guys that found it. But yeah, just like as a whole, both out of bounds, both clips are really fun to do. The out of bounds for the President's Run by far is the most satisfying, because it's like, well, the thing is, as anyone that's played the game casually, and I remember a number of times that God knows how many attempts I had at the President's Run when I was a kid and tried to finish it, and it took me so long. And then to find out that, oh yeah, you just get smashed out of bounds and you just drive to an endpoint and that done, and it's like 2 minutes. I'm like, I wish I knew this when I was a kid. And it broke me in so many ways. But at the same time, I was like, that was so satisfying that somebody's found this, and I'm so happy that it was found. But yeah, I think, like I said, 9 times out of 10, it's hands down, it's the President's Run with the out of bounds. It's just so funny. Because you get to that end every time, and everyone expects you, oh, he's got to do the bit where he gets to the other end of New York, and the police want to kill you, and you know, he's going to be dead before he gets to the end, and oh, I can't wait to see cops hit him at 1,000,000 miles an hour, because the cops are turned up to 11 deliberately, I'm sure, on that mission. And everyone just expects that. And then when you get there, and then you get shoved out of bounds, everyone's like, wait, what the heck's he doing? And then it's like, you get pushed out of bounds. Like, how the heck? You know, and then he's like, did that just happen? Did he really just do that? And it's like, I struggle with this as a kid. I was like, welcome to my world. This is what I had to witness when I was a kid. You know, it's a lovely thing to see. And I can't lie, it definitely makes me laugh. You know, between everyone that's done a run of it, it's whenever it's been shown on marathon, especially at ESA, because obviously me and Iceman knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
But then to see like chat
response.
Wait, how did he do that? He's like, did he just really do that? And I just love the reaction from chat. It was so good.
I think the best President's Run reaction I ever saw was after doing that blind race. Fru sent me I think it was a clip of Gale, you know, the GTA runner Gale, trying to do like driver 1 on the hardest difficulty on a PSP, and like after like a 12-hour, I was like a 12-hour challenge. After like the 12-hour clock comes up, he gets killed in President's Run one more time, and then just goes into the menu of the PSP and uninstalls the game. just always my memory of that experience. But
it's like 12 hours. I'm done.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm not playing this game again. We're over. All right, so let's start heading for the exit here for the script, folks. If you're if we do have people alive when we get to the end of the exit script here, there will be some chance for live questions. So think of questions for Viper here. But I got a question for you already, which is I like to do a little connective tissue for the interview series where I get a question from my previous guest for my next guest. And my guest from last week was the Boyks, Valuethon organizer, among other things. You know, I think you had a Valuethon run, right, on Sunday?
Yes, I did. Yeah, Valuethon 9, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yep. And so Boyks relayed this question for the next guest, which was, if you had to purchase one novelty instrument, what would it be?
Well, considering I've owned a guitar at one point and then it went, what could I have? So it could be any instrument. It'd have to be a novelty instrument, wouldn't it?
Right. So, you know, obviously if novelty instrument as a phrase brings to mind some things for sure. I'm going to let you, if you want to argue that something is a novelty instrument, I'm not going to stop you.
I mean, if the saxophone counts, then I'd say the saxophone. I don't know why. There's just something about it. I think The Simpsons may have caused it, but it's just something about that instrument that I'm like, if I could buy one of those, I would.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah,
I play trumpet, or I have played trumpet, and still have my horns, and so I always have a rivalry with the sax players. So as far as I'm concerned, they are novelty instruments, and I'm okay with that answer. Now, that does mean I do need from you a question for my next guest. My next guest will be a speedrunner. You don't get to know anything else just yet. Question doesn't have to be about speedrunning. Obviously, the question you just got was about music. But if you could relay that question, do you have an idea of what it might be?
I'll tell you what, I will go with a question regarding books, which is for the next guest. What is the one book that you've read and it has blown you away? As in, really enjoyed, right. It's been a fantastic story, that sort of thing.
Awesome. No, that'll be fun. So I will now spoil for you at least. So this is someone who's done a lot, who's actually done a handful of runs. They've only been running for a year, but I was already impressed with their page so far. They've done mostly horror stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so you recognize the name then. But yeah, I was like, oh, this would be a really interesting person to have on, and so I'm looking forward. That'll be a week from now. All right. Well, how about are there upcoming games that you've been keeping an eye on that you're excited to play?
In terms of upcoming games, there hasn't been too many that I've had my eye on, to be honest. Because I mean, I've been more what's it like the games that came out years ago. I've more been sticking to those, so I've not really kept too big of an eye on modern games. I can't really think of any off the top of my head, to be honest. I mean, there has been quite a few new arrivals and a lot of games that people have gone, they'll be buying that. I couldn't really give you one, to be honest.
No, honestly, that's fair. I feel like this question, which is, a normal question in my script, is going to be kind of hard right now because I think we have now gotten into the point where the effect of the pandemic on like video game releases has become very pronounced. And,
yeah, like things being pushed
right.
back.
A lot of things have been pushed back. Like the stuff that was already in the pipeline to being released got released in 2020. And now, I mean, the good news is that we're getting a lot of interesting indie games getting more coverage than they normally would, which is why I'm still asking this question in case you are seeing things like that. Like I know, like recently, some of the podcasts, the video game podcasts I listened to talked about Art of Rally, which is a game I probably never would have heard about otherwise, as an example.
That's a great game. Yeah, I will say that much.
It looked good for sure. So, but anyway, let's keep going then. What about if you could put more eyeballs? If you could give shout outs for people that aren't watched enough and should be watched more. Would you have any names to drop on us?
Blimey, I've got quite a few people that I could list, but if I could just narrow a few down.
Yeah, give me a few.
Let's see. So there's a guy who's recently been running a few racing games called Movil and Drone. I think it's Move Land Drone or something like that, but it's like Movil, so Movell and then Drone at the end. I think it's and Drone.
Yeah, if you want to, feel free to drop that in the chat if you want.
It's probably going to be like a long name, but let me see if I can get it, because it's literally like I'm just looking at him now. Let's see. There we go. It's a hard name to pronounce. But yeah, so he's been recently doing a few racing games as well. I think there's definitely a few mentions that I can give to some guys that are from the Colin McRae rally and the drive community, hands down. So I believe you had a guy called Apache on Apache Smash.
Yep.
A couple of weeks ago, was it? So he'll be definitely be familiar with this person. But there's a guy called Iceman, and we mentioned him again briefly very much before. He's a great driver runner and a great Metal Gear Solid speedrunner for those that are interested for that side of things. There's also a few guys from the Colin McRae community which come to mind, like I said, straight away, which include the likes of a guy called Franzola. I think it's like Franzola23. I'm not sure if he has digits at the end. I can't remember, but he's called Franz for us lot. There's a guy called Shotu as well, who's running quite some. It's basically like he runs a variety of games. Like racing's primarily his focus, from what I can tell. But he has like run games that are only known in Poland and things like that. You know, games that they're like little games that you would never think about speedrunning before, and he has and stuff like that. I think he's run something called KO the Kangaroo.
Yeah, I have talked about KO the Kangaroo on this podcast before.
I wasn't sure if that was one that you might be familiar with, but yeah, so he's run that recently, and I know he's been playing like new Super Lucky's Tale and things like that casually. But yeah, there's a few people, but again, like my mind's kind of gone blank. It's kind of difficult to explain like who I go for. I watch a guy called Rhino GT4 from time to time. He's mainly a racing guy, not speedrun wise, just general racing. But if I keep it on speedrunning terms, that sort of thing, most of the guys from, if I'm being honest, again, like there's too many to name, so I'm just going to mention one community in particular that I have a lot of love for. We all get on really well, and it is the UKSG community, the United Kingdom Speedrunners Gathering community. And between the lot of us, we're all like one big happy family. We have that much of a connection with each other, and we get on so well. And we have a laugh with each other. And obviously, at this current moment, no one's going anywhere, so it's a case of whenever we get a chance to meet up, I'm sure it'll probably be one of the best in-person events we've had for a long time, because it will be the first in quite a while.
Everyone's hungry for those first in-person events again, for sure.
It's just like that community as a whole is just amazing. Like the guys that run it, you know, the guys that are staff who I work with, the guys that run in it. We have had so many runners over the last few years, and how much that community has grown. People that have turned up to the events in person when we've had it, and it's just an amazing community. And like I said, there's too many people to name, but that community as a whole is definitely one that I'd like to mention.
Awesome. No, I mean that's important too. To shout out events, to shout out communities. I think those are all, you know, those are all important elements. Now, where should people be looking for you and what you do?
So if anyone wants to find me, there's a few places you can find me. So my Twitch, which is the BPG13, it'll probably go up as Viper Racing, but if it comes up as BPG, you've still found the right person, don't worry. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm usually scouring through that. I also have my YouTube channel, and of course on Discord, which is, I think, a lot of people's go-to social media platform in this day and age. You can always find me either in my server or in, like I said, a few community servers such as UKSG, ESA, BSG most notably, but also marathon servers as well, because believe it or not, I like having my hands stuck in very many cookie jars, if we can call it that. So
that's fair.
If there's a marathon, I might be there. You never know.
No, I mean, it's great, and it's a great way to meet communities, and certainly, you know, it's, as clearly you indicated, it's paid off for you in terms of, you know, being involved with UKSG, among other, you know, great marathon communities. All right, well, I think that about wraps up the formal part here. Viper, thank you so much for giving me all this time.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
I do need one more thing from you before we move on to the Q&A, which is I'm going to use a cheesy catchphrase, and you're going to give me your best rocket engine noise.
Okay.
Excellent. That's a great response. I love that. Folks, thank you so much for listening. Let's boost on out of here.
Whoosh. I can't really do it. It's like whoosh.
No, you did it. You killed it. It was great. All right, folks. If you got questions, I know Overkill already put one in. I got that one. But if you got questions, just throw them in the chat, and we're on the front page for another 10 minutes still. So, you know, get them in now or forever hold your peace. Overkill asks, earlier you were talking about expanding your horizons of speedrunning, and I was wondering if there were aspects specific to speedrunning racing games that you were able to use while learning runs of other genres of the games? And if that's the case, how has that affected your learning experience?
So, in terms of something that I'd say I've learned from racing games and something that I put into speedruns, it's mainly being consistent. So I think this goes for anybody that does speedrunning in any way, but for me, when you're doing something like a racing game, you tend to want to build up the ideal time and the best time you can. The easiest thing to kind of mention is, like, for example, the original Colin McRae rally, because of the fact that I'm constantly trying to make sure that whenever I do a stage, I'm giving it 110% max attack and making sure it's as fast as possible. And that translates usually over to any other speedrun. So even if the game isn't racing, like, for example, Pursuit Force or Treasure Planet or something like that, I'm still going to give it my all. Now, granted, we can kind of say with Treasure Planet, it's new, so I'm not going to go heads like straight for it. But for the most part, it's a case of if I get into a game, that consistency picks up. I often want to try and be the best I can be. And it, like I said, it sticks through not just racing, but through all different genres. Whether it be action adventure, shooter, you know, like any sort of game that involves cars or weapons. So, for example, it's something like Mario Kart, maybe. It's basically consistent. I mean, it's something that sticks in a lot of people's minds, but for me, it's constantly on the back of my mind. It's like, come on, you need to be better than that. And I kind of push myself a lot when it comes to doing it. I don't say it out loud, but in back of my mind, I'm constantly like trying to push myself and be the best I can. So, yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's about right in terms of consistency. And it does seem like sort of the bread and butter thing, you know, and I'm watching you do turn after turn after turn, you know, in Colin McRae, you know, it's you know, less about like, I got a sick drift once. It's like, no, like what is the right way to do it every time? You know, that's actually what's meaningful here.
That's the one.
All right. Well, see, I know there are people are here, but they're not giving me questions. How about, so you mentioned some people earlier, in terms of, you know, folks that you would shout out as people to watch. Would you single out any of them in particular as potential future OverBoost guests? You know, if you want to do my work for me of finding people to talk to, would you say, man, I'd love to watch an episode with
Iceman would definitely be one that if I had to pick one out of the ones that I mentioned, I definitely would pick Iceman. That's not to single out every other person that I mentioned, but I think Iceman would probably be a great guest because, like I said, he's very down to earth, he's very chill out, and like I said, even though in terms of like his speedruns, he's not done that many games as far as I know. Like his list does have a few Metal Gear Solid and Driver and stuff.
Yeah.
But I still rank him as a pretty good speedrunner through and through, and I think learning about his past would be quite interesting. Because believe it or not, me and him get on quite well in the same wavelength, and we have a good chat and a good natter about things every now and again. But yeah, it's definitely a fun time. And like I said, I think it'd be very cool to learn a bit more about him.
No, that's fair. I mean, when I was listening to the ESA Together VOD, I was definitely happy with the commentary. You know, obviously Iceman was an irreplaceable resource as being someone who you know worked on some of those tricks and everything. But like, you know, commentary performing is its own skill, and Iceman was delivering there as well.
Yeah, he definitely delivers when you need him to. I'll say that much. He was a great commentator as well for that run. I can definitely say that much.
Definitely. All right, cool. Well, we still don't. Make's like, when's Viper Racing? Is there www.whensviperracing.com? And it's like whenever people ask that, that's like the. Oh, you know what? Actually, I meant to at one point circle back around. There was a question. I usually try to be good about interjecting questions into the flow of things, especially, you know, because sometimes when you ask an open-ended question, a guest will have in their mind sort of a path to go down, but I'll hear something and I'll be like, oh, wait a second, I gotta get in there. A thing that I didn't get in there to ask, how did you end up on Twitch in the first place? Because you mentioned being already on Twitch and discovering Adam AK, discovering Joshimuz, classic GTA runners. But like, getting on Twitch in the first place can be its own hurdle. Was there a different reason that you were on the site already?
It was a case of, like, the same as YouTube. It was a case of I basically created an account because there was people that I wanted to watch and I wanted to subscribe to on YouTube, and that was how that one started. And Twitch was kind of the same thing. When I created that account originally, about 10 years ago now, if it doesn't feel like 10 years ago, but when I created the account the first time round, I remember that streaming wasn't something I ever thought I'd be doing. It was just a case of I had an account, I could chat to other streamers, that sort of thing. And that basically was how that side of things started. And then streaming just kind of came with it over the years. And obviously speedrunning definitely increased the amount of streaming that was done over the years.
No, that's a fair answer. I think for me, I'd gotten into Twitch because like I was watching fighting game tournaments, and so like that was naturally, a place to gravitate towards like 10 years ago. All right, we're getting close to the end of our time window anyway. Do you have someone that when time comes up that we can go raid? Someone that we could have as a target?
I could have a quick check. Give me 1 second. I could have a quick check for you. There's got quite a few people on my follows list, so this could be one of very many people. Let's see. There is actually, yes. I can definitely mention this one. So the guy in question is a guy who's known as Dove. So I'll put his name in chat so you can see it. There we go. So, long story short, Dove is a guy that is part of like a little mini community of friends that I'd met through a few other people as well. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of like I'd met somebody and then he put me in contact with Dove and whatnot. But the guy himself, he's very relaxed, down to earth, and he's very like community all round based guy. So like with me, I obviously do my speedrunning side of things, and as far as he goes, it's like more more community based gaming sort of thing. So for example, even though he does like casual playthroughs and things like that, he often does like how he's doing now. He's doing like a multiplayer match with friends and public. So he's quite a community-based guy, and I quite like him for that.
Awesome. Well, in that case, I'm going to queue that up then. There's actually, so I don't know who's watching from the front page of speedrun.com, but apparently you're going straight to another reservation as soon as I go off. So I guess there's some other event going on that'll be featured there. Of course, if you're on my channel, I appreciate watching that too. So let me cue that up. Viper, again, thank you so much for giving me all the time and humoring me in my clear car ignorance of all my questions. I appreciate that a lot.
No problem. Like I said, thank you very much again for having me on the podcast, and glad I can open up some people's perspectives for racing and for speedrunning and that sort of stuff.
Awesome.
Hopefully everyone's enjoyed the time.
Yeah, no, I think everyone had a lot of fun. Well, I'm going to let you go now and end the call, and hopefully I'll see you around at some point.
Yeah, that you will.
Peace. Take care.
Thank you very much for having me. You too. See you later.